Racism in workplace. Racism at work is the first comprehensive examination of racism in workplaces. It begins with the premise that racism profoundly affects people's lives, yet thus far there has been little investigation and still less understanding of how racism functions on the job for both white and non-white employees. Racism is a prominent social issue that remains unresolved. It has been a significant problem in workplaces around the world, especially in workplaces involving blacks and whites. Racism at work involves any act that is severe or pervasive enough to create a work environment that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive. It involves any offensive conduct based on race, color, religion, gender and national origin that is perceived to be detrimental to the mental and/or physical well-being of an individual. Racism in workplace in USA. Racism in the workplace occurs when an employee experiences discrimination based on race, ethnicity or skin color. Employment discrimination based on race encompasses many disparate treatment practices, including discriminatory hiring and firing or a hostile working environment. According to USDOL statistics, 7,256 charges involving race discrimination were filed in 2009, while 2,840 charges were filed against federal employees alleging race bias. Racism in the workplace is not just about personal prejudice, but also about more systemic discrimination. It has dangerous consequences for workers, who can suffer a wide range of damaging effects due to racism, including lower pay and diminished job opportunities. In 1972, 31% of blacks earned less than $2,500 per year compared to 6% of whites. By 1998 this had gone down to 16% for blacks and less than 1% for whites. Racism in workplace in UK. Racism at work describes all forms of racism experienced in workplaces. Examples include racial harassment, racist graffiti or posters, being refused work or promotion or being treated badly by colleagues because of your race. It also includes the effects of wider racist practices in employment on minority ethnic groups as a whole and refers to the systematic exclusion of ethnic minorities from a particular sector because of their race. Racism still remains a problem in the UK and it is undermining our ambition to build one nation. The government must do more to tackle discrimination in the workplace, according to a parliamentary report into racial inequality in Britain. Organizations, employees, and stakeholders acknowledge that racism remains a persistent problem in the workplace. Despite many organizations' efforts to create non-discriminatory workplaces, UK businesses cannot be said to be free from racism. Indeed, almost 12 years after the Macpherson Report, 1999, highlighted the pervasive nature of institutional racism within British state institutions, organizations continue to face problems dealing with discrimination. Racism in workplace in China. Racism and other forms of discrimination are prevalent in places of business in China, and this is mostly due to the rampant level of inequality between the rich and poor Chinese people. Racism in China is the issue of racism encountered by people of different racial groups in China, including how their treatment is reflected in official policies, media reports, and public opinion. Workplace racism refers to negative actions or discrimination against people of color at their workplaces. In the 19th and 20th century, social theorists developed theories of human races which based themselves on Western ideas. Therefore, these theories were inevitably racist towards non-white subjects. Many contemporary sociologists study the racism which is inherent in workplaces and other organizations in China. Racism in workplace in India. With the rapid growth of technology and changing infrastructure, the workforce of India has been able to push the boundaries and work in environments that are culturally different from their surroundings. Work environment in India is generally perceived as a safe haven from everyday casteism, prejudice and discrimination based on race, religion, gender and ethnicity etc. Racism in workplaces has been found to exist in India. International migrants to India often face discrimination, including denial of equal rights, and this racism is faced by both temporary and longer-term migrant workers. These problems may be faced by the large number of NRI, PO and OCI workers based or working in India. Racism in workplace in Canada. Racism in the workplace is illegal. Racism at work can take many forms, all of which are against the law and can result in penalties. How deep does racism go in Canada? Racism manifests itself in many ways, such as employment discrimination and racist violence. It is also treated differently under Canadian law. To deal with racism, researchers say people must be culturally competent and governments must listen to those who experience it every day. Racism in Canada occurs for numerous reasons, and Canada's history is marked where racism has been endemic. In contrast to many other countries around the world, white Canadians of European ancestry have historically been the majority population that exercised most political, economic, and social power in Canada. For example, between 1864 and 1996, over 15,000 people were hanged for murder or treason at gallows on Canadian soil. Yet only 26 hangings were carried out against persons convicted of murder or treason with Black African origins. Racism in workplace in developing countries. Racism is a problem that has existed for a long time. This is one issue that the world would want to see eradicated. Racism exists everywhere in the world, it just varies from one place or country to another. This can be classified at the national level, regional level, or even organizational racism. Developing countries may have had problems with racism in their earlier years of existence, but with time, they have shaped up to offer an equal opportunity to all races. However, this does not mean that there are no biases today. Racism is a perception of an inferior status via ethnicity, nationality, or skin color. Racism has been fading off in the developed countries, but remains intact its presence within the developing countries. The term racism is often used interchangeably with terms such as bigotry or discrimination. Racism in workplace in developed countries. Racism is a concern in the United States, but racism is present in other developed countries. People can be discriminated for many reasons such as race, color, age, gender, and sexuality. In the 21st century, there are still problems of racism across the globe. Today's societies take on several different approaches against racism, which include the law and the efforts to promote equality, better race relations, and protection for all people from discrimination. Modern-day racism in the workplace. Modern-day racism in the workplace can be defined as any attitude, action, or institutional structure that subordinates a person or group because of his or her color. Modern-day racism in the workplace is characterized by ethnic, racial, or gender prejudice that manifests in discriminatory recruitment, hiring, promotion, compensation, and termination decisions, as well as harassment and hostile work environment behavior. What is modern-day racism? Modern-day racism goes beyond the blatant insults of yesteryear. It comes at you in more subtle and sophisticated ways, such as cultural and institutional prejudice. For example, instead of yelling at you, someone might try to engage you in a philosophical discussion to challenge your religion. So you're forced to debate your beliefs, as opposed to reacting emotionally to an insult.